Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. Crypto Stu here in the Crypto Stu studio. I know it's been a long time since I've made a video, but I said I'll make a video whenever I have something to say, and I've got something to say, so here we are. This one's about, I saw that Trump was saying that he was going to make some kind of Bitcoin reserve, that the U.S. government would basically have Bitcoin on its balance sheet or in its treasury or something along those lines. I wanted to talk about, it was actually a video I was going to make anyway, but not about that, but very similar, about why the U.S. doesn't need it. So I don't think it'll actually happen. It doesn't matter if it does or it doesn't. I don't, it's not necessary. So to cover this, first we have to go back to the formation of the Bitcoin ETFs, and I'm going to try to get through this as quickly as possible. There are no visuals for this video, so if you're driving or something, there's no need to look at the screen. So the Bitcoin ETFs. First, we have to dispel the myth that Gary Gensler is some kind of foolish bureaucrat like most people in government. He's not. All right, this guy taught Bitcoin and blockchain at MIT, and he's very sharp. Those classes that he taught are on YouTube, and I've watched them, and you should watch them. He's very good. He understands Bitcoin as much as anybody. And so he's not some bungling idiot who just happens to be the head of the SEC. So the story is that Gensler denied the Bitcoin ETFs, which he did, and that the ETF companies took him to court, which they did, and that the ETF companies won in court. And over Gensler's stern objection, freedom won, and it was this grand moment, and the judge gavels, and Bitcoin is now part of the financial system with their ETFs. That is technically what happened, and if you Google it, that is the events. However, that's not really what happened. The government wanted these ETFs to happen, and that's obvious. Or at least Gensler wanted these ETFs to happen, and that's obvious. And why do I say that? Because he allowed the futures ETFs he passed the futures ETFs. He didn't have to do that. And when he passed the Bitcoin futures ETFs, what that did was it left a gaping door for the Bitcoin spot ETFs to pass. When he allowed the futures ETFs to happen, but then did not allow the spot ETFs to happen, all the spot ETF companies had to do was go to the courts and say, well, why? His argument was that Bitcoin was too easily manipulated to have a spot ETF. But if it's easily manipulated, then it shouldn't have a futures ETF either. And he could never had a good answer to the question, well, why is this easy manipulation make it impossible to have a spot ETF but not a futures ETF? He never had a good answer to that question. And I believe that this was all contrived. It was all theater. When he passed those futures ETFs, he knew that he would lose in court for the spot ETFs. So when he passed the futures ETFs, he was essentially passing when he passed the futures ETFs, he was essentially passing the spot ETFs. That's what he was doing. But he knew he'd get taken to court, and he knew he'd lose, because when he passed the futures ETFs, he had no good answer to why the spot ETFs would happen. So he just wanted the spot ETFs to happen, but for it to look like he didn't want it. And he got that. It looked like it happened against what his wishes. He fought them in court, and he lost, and freedom won, and Bitcoin has spot ETFs. Now, that is my theory. Is I have no evidence whatsoever, but my theory, based on how smart this guy is and what a foolish mistake it was to allow the futures ETFs, I believe that it was all contrived. That he allowed those futures ETFs as a means of allowing the spot ETFs, but having it look like he didn't want the spot ETFs. Okay, so what does that have to do with a Bitcoin reserve? Well, if you look at the paperwork on every single one of the spot ETFs, it says that if at any time the spot ETF folds, anyone who's holding any Bitcoin in the spot ETF, they don't get Bitcoin, they get dollars. So if you have one Bitcoin's worth of the spot ETF, right now that's about $60,000, right? 61,000. So if the spot ETF folds, what you'll get is a check or a deposit in your IRA account or whatever for $61,000. You'll get dollars. So that's going to happen. You'll get dollars, but you'll never get the Bitcoin. So why is this relevant? Well, so what the ETFs have created is the largest pool in the world of seizable Bitcoin that the government can seize anytime it wants or needs. And what I mean by that is, suppose what Bitcoiners believe might happen or will happen, and the US dollar collapses and the whole financial system is disrupted and everybody adopts a Bitcoin standard. Well, Max Kaiser has talked about this for many, many years. And he talks about how eventually, even if a central bank believes there's a 1% chance that Bitcoin will become the new standard, they'll have to start carrying Bitcoin in their balance sheets because their basic game theory, they have to hedge against that possibility. So they'll have to start carrying Bitcoin in their balance sheets. And then what's going to happen is that's basically going to create some kind of arms race for collecting Bitcoin. Right now, that's happening among people. People are trying to collect as much Bitcoin as they have, and then it'll move to companies. Then it'll move to countries. All right. So the first company to start stockpiling Bitcoin is Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy. First country is El Salvador. But once there's a second and a third and a fourth, it'll start becoming almost like a competition, especially among the countries, because they can just print money and buy Bitcoin with it. But what he also said was the U.S., unfortunately, will be last one to this race. And the reason for that is because the country that is issuing the reserve currency cannot possibly embrace the idea that that currency might collapse and that the world might turn its back on it. It would cause the collapse. So that the U.S. would be the last country that would be able to, and so the U.S. would be the worst. If there was a Bitcoin standard, the U.S. would come out of it in the worst way. Well, not anymore, because with these Bitcoin ETFs, if there was some kind of financial collapse, the U.S. government would just declare some kind of emergency, and they would seize those ETF, the Bitcoin in those ETFs. All they have to do is use the word emergency. They can do whatever we want. We learned that a few years ago. They would seize all the Bitcoin in those ETFs. Now you can say, whoa, Crypto Stu, are you saying my money in my Bitcoin ETF is unsafe? No, I'm saying it's perfectly safe. I'm saying whatever you have in your Bitcoin ETF and whatever it's worth at the time the government seizes it, they'll go ahead and print you the dollars and you'll get those dollars. But that Bitcoin will become property of the U.S. government. So, and then what would that mean? It would mean the U.S. government would once again be the richest country in the world. On a Bitcoin standard, the largest pool of Bitcoin outside of Satoshi's coins is those Bitcoin ETFs. So if the government were to seize those Bitcoin in the Bitcoin ETFs, and that was the new standard, the U.S. government would be by far the richest country in the world yet again. So, and I believe that was the point. What they have created is a pool of seizable Bitcoin that they can take if they ever seem to need to. And that was the point of the whole charade. And that's my story. And what raises me is nobody's saying this. I mean, that's what I saw the entire time these ETFs were coming out. I'm like, they're just creating a pile of Bitcoin so they can take it if they need to. Not a single pundit has said this. That's the only reason I'm making this video, is that nobody else has this theory. And I didn't really think it had much merit until I bounced it off a friend of mine who's in finance. And he doesn't invest in Bitcoin, doesn't believe in Bitcoin. But I bounced my theory off him, and he was just like, well, it's plausible. He said it's a plausible theory. And so that's why I felt like I'd at least share it with you guys, that Trump doesn't really need to make a Bitcoin pool for the United States government, because the United States government already has a pool of seizable Bitcoin, and that pool is the Bitcoin ETFs. If ever need be, the government will simply take the Bitcoin in the Bitcoin ETFs and close those ETFs down, and they'll give everyone their dollars, and then the government balance, the Treasury will have those Bitcoin. So that is my video. That is my story. I got a couple other ones I'm going to make pretty soon, so stay tuned. It's good to be back. Until next time, this is Crypto Stu, signing off.